Hi, my name is Stanislav Costiuc and I am a game designer. Today we'll start taking a look at a franchise proposed by the patron Slamdance, which has won the respective topic vote.
Resident Evil.
Naturally, we have to begin with the first game of the series, more precisely with its 2002 remake, or rather the 2014 remaster of said remake that, barring some caveats not present in the 2002 version, is the definitive way to experience Resident Evil 1. A little bit of clarification regarding how I choose games for breaking them down with my Stasocritic system. If gameplay or narrative aspects are distinct enough, they are considered to not be the same game and will have separate videos dissecting each one. In case of Resident Evil, for example, that would be Resident Evil 2 from 1998 and 2019. They are based on the same narrative premise but have widely different mechanics and gameplay, therefore each would have their own video. If various releases are for all intents and purposes the same game, then one is chosen as the definitive version, maybe because of quality of life updates or new content or better graphics, and the critique is then based on that version. With the first Resident Evil, the choice is not quite simple. There are a lot of different versions with each being unique one way or another. Ultimately, they all are the same game at its core. The differences that do exist aren't distinct enough to warrant a separate video for each version, and the remake is quite frankly the strongest option out of all. And yes, if you start making a list, the remake has a lot of changes and additions in comparison to the original PlayStation release. But at its heart, it is still the same experience, and everything new is integrated so seamlessly that without playing all versions you wouldn't really know for sure what is new. Now, with this lengthy introduction out of the way, let's jump into our critique. Please note there will be some things in this video that can be considered spoilery, but I will try my best in each case to minimize the impact of the spoiler and make sure that you are still left with something to be surprised about if you decide to play the game for the first time after watching this video. Let's start with our first Stasocritic category, Design. This is the most important part of Stasocritic with the biggest score weight, 4, because player engagement is affected most by how the gameplay experience is built. And from the get-go, Resident Evil establishes that it stands on 4 main pillars: resource management, puzzles, tension, and skill mastery. Let's take them all in order, starting with resource management. As soon as you meet your first zombies in Spencer Mansion, you realize that they take quite a lot of bullets to be put down for good, and there is not nearly enough ammo available at any given time to just shoot everything you see. Technically, on normal difficulty there is just enough ammo spread out across the game that you can try to do that if you want to, but your goal is to be smart about your resource spending rather than just shoot everything. Resident Evil reinforces that goal in several ways. First, your inventory space is limited. Chris has 6 inventory slots, Jill has 8, and you won't be able to just go around with a ton of weapons and healing items and whatnot. So if you spend a bunch of ammo killing several zombies in one room, you might not have enough to deal with the enemies in the next one, where it would be much more imperative to do so. Then, even if you do kill a zombie, it stays dead for good only in 2 situations. When you've destroyed its head or kneecaps, which is random but chances are higher when you aim at the respective body parts with a shotgun, and when you burn the body, which most of the time would require you to have a lighter and kerosene flask on hand, again taking up inventory space. If you don't do any of those things, after some time the zombie will get up again as a Crimson Head, a much faster and deadlier form of the enemy which will require even more ammo to deal with. And lastly, even saving a game is a resource. To do that, you need to find a typewriter and use a special ink ribbon, of which there is a limited amount. The exact number depends on the difficulty level. On normal it is 30. Though you don't have to be afraid too much about not being able to save ever again, as whenever you discover a new typewriter, you most likely will find a pack of ink ribbons besides it. But still, you need to think twice before making a decision to save your progress. And ink ribbons also take up your inventory slots, by the way. The pretty big downside to that saving system is lack of flexibility with your session times. Unless you just put your console to rest, which is not always viable, there is no way to leave the game and get back to where you were without spending a save. Ideally, Resident Evil would have an autosave system that would remember the state of the game on exit, that it would put you back into when you return, while manual save would remain as checkpoints in case you die. It feels pretty bad knowing that you are willing to risk going further without permanently saving your progress, but have to spend an increment because of something that came up outside of the game. But regardless, you can see how Resident Evil is structured to constantly push you to make decisions. Which item you use and when, what object you take and when, even when you create a checkpoint to return to should you die. Even though all of this is very smartly set up, there are two pretty big problems, which mostly affect only your first walkthrough when you're still figuring things out, but the first playthrough is also the most important one. So, you can combine items together in your inventory. For example, herbs, which you can make more potent, or quest items used to solve a puzzle. But if your inventory is full, you can't try to instantly combine a suitable item you're examining with any of yours that you have already. This is an issue because there can be situations when you're punished for not picking up items in the room in the correct order, which is neither caused by nor does it lead to any interesting decisions or choices, just mindless, frustrating backtracking so you could free up a slot. And the second issue is similar in nature. With a couple exceptions, you can't put the quest items back into the place you picked them up from. And when you're exploring everything for the first time, you might not know if it's better to take an item now or later, and you can be punished for making a choice the consequences of which you weren't really aware of. I do want to clarify that I'm talking about only putting items back on their place, as if you can drop them anywhere that can lead to you abusing the system to avoid risks, which would nullify the game's resource management intentions. So not being able to just drop items wherever is not a flaw. This can lead to a question though, how do you free up inventory space anyway? Well, many safe rooms have an item box in it, where you can store everything you don't need on your person at the moment. And those item boxes are linked together, so if you put something in one room, you'll be able to take it out from another. Now, this is a nice aspect that can lead to interesting planning decisions, as you will be going back and forth between different rooms tackling the second main pillar of Resident Evil: puzzles. Your ultimate goal in the game is not to kill all enemies, but to escape the mansion you're in, and you do that in a manner similar to classic adventure games, by solving puzzles that would unlock new opportunities and areas, bringing you ever so closer to escaping. Spread out across nooks and crannies of the mansion are quest items, ranging from keys that unlock different doors to objects that you need to utilize in particular setups, all of which are still part of the whole inventory management paradigm. And Resident Evil deals with this aspect masterfully. To explain why, let's talk about what is a puzzle in the first place. In its most basic form, it is essentially a combination of three things: motivation, obstacle, and solution. So your initial motivation is to escape the mansion. As you try to do that, you discover a locked door, the obstacle, and it needs a sword emblem key, the solution. Now finding the sword emblem key becomes the motivation. The obstacle, a locked entrance to a crypt. The solution, well, you see that the crypt has an arrowhead indentation. So when you find an arrow, you instantly make the connection where it is needed, but it also doesn't fit as a whole arrow, so you have to examine it to take just the arrowhead. And while there are quite a lot of puzzles related to finding a particular way to unlock a certain area, it all flows very well. And there are some more traditional puzzles too. The most important part is that everything in Resident Evil has a hint to the solution, so you're never just randomly trying differing things out. Need to create a special chemical compound? Well, a certain book and some wall scribblings will give you all the information you need to logically conclude how you have to mix the components. Unlocking the door to that chemistry lab requires a particular lock combination, and there is another room that holds everything you need to know for that. So Resident Evil weaves this huge web of different puzzles all across the map, each providing a concrete motivation, obstacle marked with red on the schematic, and a solution marked with blue that is hinted at one way or another. Not all puzzles are mandatory for completion, but some that are optional may help you greatly, for example by rewarding a powerful magnum revolver. And you know, this schematic may look quite complex. How are you expected to process everything? Well, Resident Evil unlocks its map gradually. At the beginning, there is really not a lot of areas that you can visit, and while you do gain a number of motivations and questions through finding obstacles you can't overcome yet, or items that you're not able to use for now, there is only a single puzzle that you can solve. the aforementioned arrowhead one to get into a crypt, which houses another obstacle that requires 4 quest items you haven't even seen yet to solve, and your first key which unlocks more areas and helps you with building all these connections, what you have to do and where. Thanks to the overall puzzle structure, you have to go through many different areas of the mansion there and back again, repeatedly being forced to engage with the resource management loop to make sure you have everything you need and you'll be able to deal with any danger that you encounter. And through this interplay between puzzle solving and resource management, we get tension, the third pillar of Resident Evil. At first, the game is full of unknowns. You never really know what you'll see on the other side of the door, and that feeling is made even more nerve-wracking through the use of special door opening animations between different areas. In the original PlayStation release, they were a result of technical limitations to mask loading times, but they served well to build this worrying anticipation of what you'll find once you're across. And sure, sometimes these animations can be bothersome, and while the remake probably doesn't need them technically, there's still a great stylistic choice that helps with creating tension. Now, once you've been to a room or a hallway, you think that maybe you have seen everything there is to it, but that's not the case. The game regularly changes up enemy composition, be it in small or big ways. At times it adds creatures to overcome, sometimes removes those, and it can entirely replace one enemy type with another. There can be a situation where you're safe and going through a corridor starting with one end of the hallway, but if you visit it from another end, a couple of rabid zombie dogs jump in to kill you. So you can never be entirely sure what is going to wait for you beyond the other door, until you get enough knowledge about how the game works, leading us to the final pillar of Resident Evil, skill mastery. What is naturally going to happen in your first pretty slow, full of scares and mistakes playthrough is amassing knowledge. What conditions trigger which events, which items are required to solve which puzzles, how best to get from one place to another, how to conserve resources by avoiding enemies rather than killing them, maybe to the point of learning how to bait an attack to then run past the monster. By the end of the game, you'll not only get a lot better at playing it, but also you'll be always prepared for what's to come. So should you replay the game, that is going to give you a pretty big confidence boost and the ability to perform even better. And this is where we get to probably the most intriguing part of Resident Evil. Let's be fair, replaying a game is not something players tend to do, unless they really love it or have free time with nothing else to play. But how do you encourage as many people as possible beyond those categories to try and replay at least once and get this feeling of mastery? You add another playable character. Completed game with Jill? Well, how about you try playing as Chris now? And to make sure that there is some tension involved still, there are a number of differences between their scenarios, so you still will get something unexpected. But even with that in mind, your second playthrough will always be faster and more efficient. Might as well try to replay again and maybe get some extra unlocks or achievements, right? Including a rocket launcher with unlimited ammo if you complete the game fast enough, meaning that if you want to replay again to unlock something else, it can be done in a much more straightforward manner. And then you open up other modes, like the one dangerous zombie, which adds a strapped with grenades undead that follows you in some places and kills you instantly should you damage him. For some reason, this particular mode stays on all the time and can't be turned off. It's not as bad as it might sound, it's pretty easy to avoid this monster, but still it is weird you can't toggle it. Other modes are optional though, like the invisible enemy mode when all enemies are, as the name says, invisible, and the real survival which puts the game on hard difficulty while disabling auto-aim and unlinking all item boxes. Lack of auto-aim though doesn't hurt that much with a modern control scheme, so let's talk about that. Original Resident Evil and the original Remake had only tank controls, meaning pressing up always moves the character forward relative to the direction they're facing, not the camera. And there was no strafing. To move to the sides you had to manually turn around, and should you require quick escape possibility, the remake introduced a quick 180-degree turn. Now traditionally I consider tank controls to be clunky and unwieldy, and they really are. If you try to move around with the analog stick, you'll be wobbling constantly. But with the D-pad, in the context of Resident Evil's gameplay, I think they work. Yes, at first you'll have to get used to them. Until you do, you might get into tricky situations. But the fixed camera angles make that process of learning how to control the character much more straightforward than a game with 10 controls and a rotating camera would. because you always have the view of the immediate surroundings, and camera change and focus doesn't change the buttons or directions you have to press, so in some cases it is actually advantageous, and really the pacing of enemies was designed with these controls in mind, so there is nothing impossible to do with them. However, the remaster or the remake also introduces a modern control scheme, where you can use the analog stick to move your character around relative to the camera position. This can introduce some issues when the camera view changes. During camera shift, the game keeps your moving direction the same until you move the stick again, but when you need to, it can lead to awkward moments of recalibration as you try to find the correct movement direction. So overall, it would be more comfortable, but not perfect. It is easier though to do some more complex bait and dodge maneuvers with this control scheme due to instant turning around towards the direction of the stick. The game clearly wasn't designed around this possibility, but ultimately, since it still requires skill mastery to be timed and performed properly, it doesn't break the balance. And for the most part, balance is something Resident Evil handles really well with its approach to risk and reward situations. If you just try to dodge and run past a zombie, you will conserve your ammo, but you risk getting bit and maybe using up one of your defense items in the process. If you point up with the shotgun when a zombie is close, you increase the chances exponentially of their head getting blown off, preventing them from becoming a crimson head. But the risk is, well, the zombies have to be near you. The Magnum revolver is really powerful, but there is a very limited amount of ammo for it in the game. Likewise, things that kill other creatures with one hit, for example acid shells that instantly deal with hunters, are in low supply as well, so you have to think before using them. The downside to all of that is that with this type of special ammo, bosses become really easy as well. When I first got to Black Tiger, I thought it was just a regular spider that I dealt with quickly, which is why I was surprised to get a trophy for it. On the other hand, it is probably good that there are easy ways to deal with bosses, because the fights themselves are really not interesting otherwise. They all boil down to a process of shoot and retreat while running around pretty bare-bones arenas, and each fight of that kind is ultimately a disappointment. Even in real survival mode with no auto-aim and low amount of ammo, boss fights can feel rudimentary. The biggest letdown though has got to be the gameplay handling of Lisa Trevor, the most fascinating and tragic character of this entire game, whom you meet 3 times, but despite her being immune to dying, all those 3 times her design as a threat to you is very basic. It all boils down to not getting into her way while you're doing your thing. It's not like there is an absolute lack of tension because she can realistically kill you still, but these situations don't feel special enough. This is why if you open up scores for the design category, I can't really put a 10 for Resident Evil. It is a 9. The game is truly exemplary in many ways. How it promotes resource management, how it structures itself, how it builds tension, promotes replayability, and many other of its aspects are just fantastic. But there are considerable issues too. Besides everything I have mentioned before, there are some really boring puzzles, like you having to move 3 big boxes in a linear corridor to push them into water, and some moments that I guess are supposed to be tense in theory, but in practice are not. Like when you have to avoid running when bringing a fuel canister to a certain place, otherwise it will explode. Since it is likely you have cleared the area beforehand anyway, nothing happens and it's just a rudimentary walk from one place to another. Even if you're nervous at first, you quickly realize there is no reason to be. And any of those issues wouldn't have been a problem on their own, but when taken together there are enough of them to not feel negligible. But still, if you want an amazing survival horror experience, you shouldn't look much farther than this game. Now, let's talk about context. This category has a weight of 1 as it is all about things that enhance the experience but don't necessarily define it. Plot, world, characters, motivations, etc. The premise of Resident Evil is simple, but it works. You're trapped in a mansion where strange things are happening and you've got to escape it, on the way uncovering the secrets of this place. So in terms of motivation, you are really in tune with the characters. You really don't want to spend more time in this place than necessary, and you can be just as confused or surprised by certain things as they are. And as you explore the mansion, you discover different documents that tell the story of what has happened here and how it has affected different people. Again, conceptually it is very straightforward. Unethical science experiments went awry and a dangerous virus outbreak has started spreading around everyone who worked there. but it is still fascinating to see how it all has happened, and there are many cases of great environmental storytelling too. For example, there is one zombie that you find in the bathroom. Now, gameplay-wise, that of course exists to create an oh shit moment for you as you unplug the bath. But contextually, this means that the person in that predicament has tried to drown themselves. And that's really unnerving when you think about it. Resident Evil is full of great little details like that. The remake also has notes from the architect behind the mansion, George Trevor, explaining why it is full of many weird traps and contraptions, and also how ultimately the person who hired Trevor has left him to die among the mazes and puzzles he himself has built, all so nobody could know its secrets. But what is more heartbreaking is the fate of Trevor's wife and daughter who were imprisoned by the Umbrella Corporation to be experimented on. Jessica, his wife, was immune to all the virus strains that she would get infected by, so she was killed due to being useless to them. While Lisa, their little daughter, well, she got bonded to the virus all too well, and was used as an experiment for pretty much everything, leaving her disfigured and immortal, while all that she wants to do is to find her mother. Discovering the details around all this backstory really makes you ponder. So with such a great atmosphere and care surrounding the lore of this place, what our main characters actually do and say rarely makes sense, though I guess all of it is still more logical than the original PlayStation version, which is known for the many memes it has generated.
Hey, what's going on?
Jill? Is that you, Jill? What happened?
Barry? Help me, please! The door won't open! Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
Oh God, what did I do now? Wesker! Barry! Help!
Jill! You in there?
Barry? Get me out of here! The door's jammed!
Stand back! Grab my hand!
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really? Thanks.
Of course, the game, for the purposes of its gameplay, wants to make sure that the player is alone, but everybody makes the flimsiest excuses to split up and wanders around willy-nilly. At some points it just doesn't make sense. Sometimes you meet people in places where they possibly couldn't get to before you, like how Richard for Chris's scenario and Barry for Jill's managed to get to the residence without the whole process of finding a crank and draining water and whatnot. Sometimes the characters have game knowledge that they couldn't possibly have, the silliest example of which is when Chris tries to play the piano to solve a puzzle.
It's me, Chris.
Rebecca.
That sounded like Moonlight Sonata.
Does it, though? I mean, I don't think so. Sometimes characters act weirdly, like there is a moment when Jill pulls a gun on Barry to demand some answers.
Start talking.
Without going into spoiler territory, that moment does make sense with some characters having their own agendas. But then, after the danger has passed, we get this.
I don't believe that thing's really dead. Leave this place up to me and go on ahead.
Okay.
Really, Jill? 5 minutes ago you pointed a magnum at his head and now you're not going to say anything? Well, okay then. And honestly, the uneven voice acting doesn't help with situations like this, but that's a topic for another category, so let's finish up with context first. Resident Evil gets a 7. The world building is great, environmental design is fantastic, the premise is a simple but a good one. And while the plot in broad strokes is also fine, when it comes to details it can really fall apart and it's best to just not think about the logic of some things. It's still enjoyable in that schlocky B-movie kind of way, but that style doesn't quite fit with the setup and atmosphere of the rest of the game. Let's move on to aesthetics. This is another category with a weight of 1, again because it is something that enhances the experience but doesn't necessarily define it. This time through visual style, sounds, music, voice acting, etc. For this particular video, I'm going to do something I usually don't. Even though this critique and video footage is based on the 2014's HD Remaster, the rating will actually be based on the original 2002 remake version for Gamecube. There are several reasons for that. First, in the remaster, not every pre-rendered background or video is upscaled properly, and in high definition there are plenty of screens where you can see a lot of artifacts and unclarities, which provides quite a big contrast not only between the quality of these moments and the rest of the game, but also between the player character and backgrounds. The original version for Gamecube may not be HD, but there are no such issues there, everything feels of even quality. Then, the updated lighting system in some cases, as for example in the comparison shown here, makes things look a bit less atmospheric. Also, the new lighting system at times makes it really noticeable that the backgrounds are pre-rendered, for example when you burn a zombie's body. There is also quite a big difference in lip sync. The original's facial animation data doesn't quite fit the new and updated models. Take a look at these two character close-up shots, for example.
Enrico! 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 Enrico!
Yeah, in the HD remaster faces can look really weird at times. And finally, the font used in the original just fits the game better. The new one is not bad by any means, but it just feels standard in comparison. All of these issues aren't big enough to affect your impression in a considerably negative way, but still when taken together they do influence the score for aesthetics, so I figured it'll be fair if you don't let the HD remaster's flaws affect the rating for the amazing work that was done for the 2002 game. The pre-rendered backgrounds are great. There is so much detail packed in each one that really makes this mansion feel like a believable, lived-in place, even though it is filled with many different traps and puzzles. Character animations are great too. When you walk around these halls expecting something bad to happen at any moment, the fact that you can feel the tension not just within yourself, but within the character you play as, really elevates the experience. The pacing of their steps, how they hold their weapon, you can see how they really don't want a dog to jump out of the window. But the real star is probably the sound and music design. Resident Evil very smartly varies the soundscape to increase tension. Sometimes there is ominous music, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you can walk around without hearing absolutely any sound except your footsteps and surrounding environments, and that feels very unnerving, which is great for the purposes of this game. And there is a particular music that is played in all rooms where you're safe and nothing can happen. And once you build that connection with that tune, whenever you enter a room that plays it, you get to feel a sense of relief, like you can feel calm for a little while. The only flaw of Resident Evil aesthetically is the very uneven voice acting I have mentioned before. Sometimes it is good and believable, or at the very least suitably dramatic.
Hey, hold on a sec. Look what I've found.
What?
A can of fizz. It's sure to yellow and mellow those things. It's yours. Hopefully you won't have to use it.
What about you?
Oh, don't worry. I like the buddy system we have here.
I see.
And at times you feel like the people are robots who try to simulate emotions.
No, Barry! You viral cultured freak!
You killed them with your own dirty hands! You son of a bitch!
No.
And sadly, this issue is prominent enough throughout the entire game that it doesn't quite reach a 10 in the aesthetics category. But it does get a 9, which is fantastic as well. And if you're interested to know, yes, the amount of flaws in the HD remaster would bring it down to 8, which is still not bad of course. Regardless, Resident Evil does an amazing job of building a tense, uneasy atmosphere in very believable environments. Now it's time to talk about Cohesion. This category has got a weight of 2, and it's all about how well different parts of a game work together to build a wholesome, holistic experience. Resident Evil is focused on mainly one theme: survival. This is why back when the original 1996 version was released, it coined the term survival horror for the whole genre of such games. And everything does work together very well to achieve that goal of feeling like you have to survive this whole experience. From the premise of the story being about escaping a mansion where different horrible experiments took place, to the pillars of resource management ensuring that you can never really feel fully safe, to the fact that, hey, this is all happening in a mansion, meaning a large environment that is also full of tight, claustrophobic, interconnected spaces. The camera is often placed in such angles and places to create this feeling like you're being watched by someone, like from beyond a window or from behind a fence. Other times it purposefully makes sure that you can't see very far, but you can still hear somebody, so you would know that there's something in this location but wouldn't be sure what and where. And it is always appreciated how Resident Evil tries to make sure that its quiet gamey puzzles fit within the overall context of the world. From the fact that the mansion owner specifically hired an architect known for building esoteric structures so they will be able to ensure that their secrets are hidden, to different puzzles being explained in documents as either attempts to deal with the existing problem or hide something to prevent the solution from being destroyed. Maybe somebody in the future will be able to figure it out. That said, at times that logic still falls apart and that does affect cohesion. When you think about how shadows from a candle and numbers on different colored billiard balls are supposed to be a hint for unlocking a particular door, you can't help but wonder how in the world did anybody come up with that? Or how a certain passcode to open a door can only be seen through a particular filter that would hide some numbers on a slide. That seems weirdly specific. And even narratively, why does Jessica Trevor, who was killed because she was immune to the virus infection and therefore useless for Umbrella, have an altar dedicated to her that also serves as a secret pathway towards the underground laboratories? So while Resident Evil does a great job of creating a survival horror experience and making sure that as many things as possible make sense within that experience, there are also quite a lot of things the logic of which falls apart if you really think about them. This is why Resident Evil gets an 8 for cohesion. On an emotional level, it does everything right. On a logical level, it does most things right, but you really have to accept some things which are weird even in the context of Resident Evil's explanations and lore. Let's move on to the last category, emotions. This would be the most subjective part of my Stasocritic system, because it is purely about my personal feelings relating to a game, but it also has got the second biggest weight for scores, 3. After all, personal feelings do matter a whole lot. And I guess I should start with a bit of history. Well, back when I was a child, I did try out different scary games like Alone in the Dark, and in fact the very first Resident Evil. When I was 11 years old, I decided to try out Silent Hill 2 because I have heard the amazing main theme. I didn't know anything else about it, and let's just say I was traumatized enough that I never played a single survival horror game since. I did try playing Dead Space though, but never got very far. Of course, I could normally watch other people play, and being in the games industry I made sure to keep track of what's going on with this genre as well, but my interaction with the games of this type was, let's say, limited. So when Slamdance has suggested to dissect Resident Evil for this channel, and patrons have voted for it, let's just say that didn't quite sit well with me, emotionally speaking, but I knew it's a mental blocker that had to be overcome. And boy did I overcome it. I have finished Resident Evil as Jill several times. My first introductory playthrough, my fast run to get the rocket launcher which I finished in 2 hours 15 minutes, my real survival run, and then as Chris I also did one normal playthrough, and by the time of writing this I have started an invisible mode knife-only run. I am not an achievement hunter, but I'm really close to getting a platinum trophy for this game, and I think I eventually will. It's a really great game, and honestly now I wouldn't mind playing more of the series and maybe even properly checking out other survival horror franchises. Resident Evil has helped me get off my shoulders this 2-decade-long wait. Of course, the fact that it's this game in particular is purely incidental, partially luck. It could have been any survival horror game that I would have to play for my channel. So this story will not affect the score for emotional engagement with Resident Evil Remaster, but I just wanted to tell it so you all would have the proper context. On its own merits, even though I do enjoy Resident Evil as a game a lot, outside of the heartbreaking story behind Lisa Trevor, there is just not quite enough there to get a full 10-point score for emotions. I think the biggest culprit for that is the uneven voice acting, and the second biggest culprit would be the uneven story beats, all of which we have discussed already. They prevent me from getting a strong emotional attachment to the experience as a whole, so I have strong emotions related mostly to the gameplay and atmospheric part of Resident Evil, making the score for emotions a 9, which is still very strong, but after platinuming it, I don't really know what memories I will have left of it. Of course, should I notice that my current assessment is wrong, I can always release an addendum changing this score. With all that said, let's sum everything up. When all scores and weights are taken into account, the first Resident Evil, and more precisely its remake, which is the definitive way to play the first Resident Evil, gets a Stasocritic rating of 85. A really great game. If this is your first time watching my videos, I have to mention that outside of the fact that ultimately Stasocritic Score exists just for fun and really is nothing more than a numerical representation of my arguments, the important part still being the arguments themselves, the system is balanced specifically in such a way so getting a 90 plus would be very difficult to avoid inflation of such ratings. So if a game gets 80 plus, well, it means that it is truly great. You really can't go wrong with Resident Evil. In terms of gameplay, it achieves almost everything it has set out to do. The game can and should be used as a point of reference and research if one is to make a survival horror experience, and it has great replayability. Replaying so you could feel good about utilizing the knowledge and skills that you have been amassing is tied to the overall design of the game, with plenty of different aspects promoting you to play more than once. Which is absolutely something you should do if you decide to try out the remake of the first Resident Evil. Don't drop it after only one playthrough. Thank you all for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and click on the bell button to know when the next critique is out. And of course, a special thank you goes to my patrons, their support means a lot. And if you would like to influence the future of the channel by suggesting and voting for future topics, just like this game was suggested and voted for, please consider supporting my campaign at patreon.com/Farlands. Thank you very much.